Become. Picture of a disciple. Disciple is another word for follower. If you've heard a story about Jesus and said to yourself, that is a good way to live life, then you are a disciple whether you knew it or not. And you don't need to go to a special school or get a fancy title or know everything to be a disciple. Also, there's no end to being a disciple. Jesus was perfect and we never will be. So it's something you just wake up each day choosing to do, no matter what happened the day before. Jesus did so many good things because he was God on earth. But Jesus started out as a human kid, just like you. So he also became the wise leader he was by studying the history of the Jewish people who came before him. In this series, we'll think about the picture of a disciple by learning about some of these people from the Old Testament. Isaiah 58, hearing the invitation to live differently. When you were born into something, many things. And from that moment, those things have been shaping who you are and the path of your life. You probably don't remember since you were a baby, but every single day you were introduced to your new normal, what your family eats, the traffic rules in your country, the way your school looks, and the way your teachers teach. And day by day, the things that were once new to you started to become what you were used to, your comfort zone. Your little baby brain came to accept many things, what we call society, the good things about it and the bad things, all the things that you now know to be true. But there is more beyond what you know. Just think, in the year 2020, there are 7.8 billion people on the planet. That is 7.8 billion different brains. And don't you know, God made every single one of those brains. And not only those brains, but all the brains of all the people who have ever existed in history. That's a lot of brain cells and a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas. And yet adults sit and talk and scratch their heads for hours, pondering the problems we face in society, how to fight racism and white supremacy, how to solve the issue of homelessness, how to get rid of poverty. I wonder if the people who shape our society really think there aren't answers to these questions, or if they just aren't willing to listen, to hear the voices and ideas of all the people that God put on earth. Have you ever had an amazing idea for an invention or a new way of doing something, and then you told an adult, and your adult began to list all the ways that your idea would be difficult or impossible? You didn't have the right tools or time or money, or your idea wasn't needed, or nobody would want to do something like that. And because they were the adult, they were in charge, they had the power, you listened to them. And maybe you stopped dreaming, maybe you stopped imagining, and you learned that becoming an adult means just doing the same thing that all the adults before you did. Well, that's what has been happening since at least biblical times. People wanting to replicate what they are familiar with, or in other words, maintaining the status quo. Isaiah was a prophet about 2,700 years ago. Prophets delivered messages from God to the people, and the people over and over again got stuck doing things the same way, following the same rules of their society, living in the same small boxes, walking down the same narrow paths, not dreaming or imagining or creating the different life that God and all the prophets kept telling the Israelites to start living. In this time, God spoke through Isaiah, saying the people are busy at worship and love studying all about me. To all appearances, they're a nation of right living people, law-abiding, God-honoring. They ask me, what's the right thing to do? And love having me on their side. But they also complain, why do we fast and you don't look our way? The people were very concerned with following the rules of fasting, or not eating for a certain period as a way to get closer to God. And they were doing it how they've always done, but wondering why it didn't feel like God was with them. So God replied through the prophet Isaiah, the bottom line on your fast days is profit. You drive your employees much too hard. You fast, but at the same time you bicker and fight. You fast, but you swing a mean fist. The kind of fasting you do won't get your prayers off the ground. Sure, the people were following the rules in fasting, but their actions were meaningless because they were just doing as they had always done, going through the motions with no meaning, maintaining the status quo. What did God want from them? What does God want from us? God wants us to climb out of the boxes we put each other in, to widen the narrow paths that we force each other down. God wants us to get out of our comfort zones. God certainly wants adults to stop crushing children's imaginations, but more than that, God wants us to stop ignoring all the zillions of brain cells that God put on this earth. As humans, we sometimes feel that God's imagination is too big, too great for us to comprehend. But the reality is that we are God's imagination. Perhaps some problems do feel too big for one brain to handle. Your mind may freeze while trying to consider why some people own mansions on waterfront properties, while indigenous people had the land they lived off of for centuries stolen from underneath them. You may get tripped up wondering why and when and who said humans should ever even own God's earth. Your mind may feel it will explode with frustration, wondering why ever since slavery ended and no compensation or profits were given to the people who did all the labor, it has been so hard for a Black family to buy a house and feel secure in this country, while the majority of white families have owned homes and had safe and secure lives for generations. Your heart may feel torn in two, wondering why it was ever even acceptable to own another human being. But it's estimated that 103 billion have set foot on God's earth since the beginning. 103 billion of brains, hearts, stomachs. It's not human imagination that is our limit. It's that some of us are like the Israelites. We want to do the same thing over and over because we're used to it. We were born into it. But just because some of us have trouble imagining a different way of living, that doesn't mean that people past and present haven't been imagining, writing, speaking, living in different ways that are pleasing to God, using the wisdom of their brains and hearts and stomachs to guide them, just as Isaiah urges. This is the kind of fast I'm after, to break the chains of injustice, get rid of exploitation in the workplace, free the oppressed, cancel debts. What I'm interested in seeing you do is sharing your food with the hungry, inviting the homeless poor into your homes, putting clothes on the shivering, ill-clad, being available to your own families. If you get rid of unfair practices, quit blaming victims, quit gossiping about other people's sins, if you are generous with the hungry and start giving yourselves to the down and out, your lives will begin to glow in the darkness. Your shadowed lives will be bathed in sunlight. I will always show you where to go. I'll give you a full life in the emptiest of places, firm muscles, strong bones. You'll be like a well-watered garden, a gurgling spring that never runs dry. You'll use the old rubble of past lives to build anew, rebuild the foundations from out of your past. You'll be known as those who can fix anything, restore old ruins, rebuild and renovate, make the community livable again. The answers are there, in the Bible, from God, from Isaiah and so many other prophets, from Jesus, and from the minds, hearts, and souls of so many others who have come before showing us the way. We don't need bigger imaginations. We don't need new ideas. God has already given us all this and more to make the community livable again for everyone. We only need to stop making excuses for and accepting all the things that we have learned to see as normal. Stop protecting the status quo. Stop listening to the people and places that discourage change. Instead, start saying yes to the possibilities and being okay with discomfort, with not knowing everything, with not being able to fit ideas into a familiar box or push them down a narrow path in the direction you want. Start seeking out, listening to, and amplifying the voices that God created that tell us there is another way to live. Then, start living as God intended us to live.
All right, say bye.
Bye. Bye.
Can't see you, sis.